That's the cue to get started, I guess. So, good afternoon, everyone, and very, very warm welcome to our fifth resource session. And thank you all for making the time to join us today. And for those who don't know me as yet, my name is Amrita Singh, and I'm the founder of Back to Source Coaching. And of course, we work in the space of leadership development, deep coaching, and just engaging with these inner dimensions of human potential and how they impact, shape, guide systems and organizations that we create together. This this is really part of what we are calling the resource sessions, and this is our fifth session, and it's part of the larger initiative that we hold called Soulful Organizations, which is very, very close to our hearts, where we explore what becomes possible when organizations are not just shaped by strategy and structure, but also by presence, by love, by awareness, and just the sense of humanity that lives within each of the people who lead these organizations. And through these conversations, we invite people from across the world who are engaging with the same inquiry in meaningful ways, in their own way. And we just bring them into dialogue with this community that has been growing consistently over the last 6 months since we started this. And today, of course, as all of you already know, since you've received the invitation, the reminder, and then just the last minute, you must join kind of a message. But today we're delighted, honored, and privileged to have Nicholas Janni join us in this conversation. And I'm sure many of you know him, but he is the co-founder or director of Matrix Development, which is an internationally recognized leadership development organization. And he spent, I think, more than 25 years working with CEOs and senior leadership across the world. But what I find really compelling about Nicholas's work is just the way that he bridges these two domains that seem like two separates of the professional world and just this spiritual dimension of leadership. And that's really what I find most soulful and, is what made me reach out to him. And thank you for saying yes. But what many of you may have read his book, Leader as Healer, because that's available in India. And there's another book that he's written with Amy Fox, which is Leading in Chaos. Maybe Nicholas shows that because that's not yet available in India, but is available in the UK and in the US. I think in Europe as well. But what is special about that as well, for those of you who've been tracking and have been with us, our last resource session was with Amy. And it's just, I feel, just the way this quiet intelligence of the universe works and weaves threads together, that this month we're in conversation with you, Nicholas. And that theme today is becoming a soulful architect. And this, of course, points to many of the threads that we're all sensing in the systems that we are part of, and the possibility that, it can be shaped with the flowering of consciousness, presence, and relationships that live within these systems. And before we move into that space, and we have Nidhi, who's from our team at Back to Source, and she'll be anchoring this conversation. And Nidhi has been associated with Back to Source right from the beginning, from the very first day we thought about starting this company. And she's really helped, I would say, sow those seeds of what today we're seeing as soulful organizations at Back to Source. So it feels really fortunate to have her take this step forward and anchor this conversation with you. And before I leave her in your able hands and have this conversation unfold, I just want to share with everyone that feel free to type into the chat box any questions that may emerge as you're listening in to this conversation. And we will have time towards the end for a live Q&A, but we'll try and weave some of those questions into the conversation as well. But just like sit back and relax, and I'll hand it over to Nidhi to take us forth. And just a huge thank you to all of you for being here, and for Nicholas, especially for hosting and for joining us here in this space. Nidhi.
Thank you, Amrita. So, Nicholas, let me just start by saying, it's a real privilege and honor to have you here in this conversation. Can everybody hear me clearly? Am I audible? Yeah, okay, lovely. And before we get deeper into the conversation and the work that I think I'm the only one pinned here. Oh, there he is. Thank you, thank you. Before we get into the work that you do and what we have in our conversation, I just like to invite you, Nicholas, for short presencing and grounding, which I've seen that you do in other videos, and that really is beautiful. So if you wouldn't mind that, and I'm sure everybody would appreciate that as well.
Well, first of all, my deep thanks, Amrita, and to Nidhi for inviting me here. I'm really delighted to be here. Yeah, so let's do one of the single most important things we can do repeatedly. If you feel like closing your eyes, please do so. And if not, just follow with your eyes open. And I invite you to also take one of the most powerful actions we can do, which is to become the one who is paying attention, who is noticing, which is totally different from being the one who is thinking. We're not trying to stop thinking. Thinking will be happening very naturally and very rightfully, but we're becoming the ones who are paying attention. And we begin by paying attention to our breathing, very literally, which means noticing noticing the movements of your breath, and starting to notice all the sensations that are arising in your body, millisecond by millisecond. Normally we're so busy thinking that we're not noticing, but now we're beginning to notice. Tracking each step of your breath. Simply noticing. There's nothing to understand, nothing to analyze. There is simply noticing. With curiosity. Isn't it extraordinary that we are here in this body that has a whole intelligence, many thousands of processes going on inside our body with nothing needed from us. Here we are just paying attention to the breath. And then I invite one simple, deliberate action, which is to soften, relax your out-breath. Very literally, you might take a longer out-breath, you might take one or two big breaths, and then soften, relax your out-breath so you feel more contact with whatever it is you're sitting on. You begin to notice your legs more. You begin to notice the contact of your feet with the floor. And you just settle into this sense of being. A simple sense of being. that brings with it sense of space inside, sense of stillness. Perhaps a sense of a dimension that is timeless. What in all the great traditions has different names. The great void, the nowhere, the eternal. Breathing, breathing, breathing. Here in the body, here in the timeless. And perhaps realizing that one of our deepest callings as human beings is to learn to live in both dimensions at the same time, which we can talk about. So whenever you're ready, a couple of deeper breaths and remaining anchored in your sense of your body, if you wish, we can gently open our eyes.
That was magnificent, Nicholas. I could have stayed there for the rest of the day.
Me too.
Thank you
And
for that.
yeah, you mentioned Rumi in our pre-meeting. So one of my favorite phrases of Rumi is when he said, live in the nowhere that you come from, even though you have an address here.
Mm.
And most of the time we're so busy and so overabsorbed by thinking that this other dimension remains hidden, but it is always there. And in some of the traditions, they have a beautiful metaphor of when you open a book, you see all the black letters, and there is also a white page. That's the nowhere.
Wow. So I mean, I can stay in this space of talking about that white spaces in between those letters. Um, but I also want to, everybody's here to be, everyone's here as part of the resource sessions where we are kind of pausing and from the noise, for everyday noise of work, of family, of pressures, and really begin to align at something deeper, within ourselves. And this connection, I think it took me directly there. But I also want to know that in terms of soulful organizations, I find that sense of connection, that something deeper is missing. So from your point of view and your perspective, what does a soulful organization mean?
That's a very big question. um, Maybe it's easier to start with what is a soulful leader, because soulful organizations will be, to a large degree, dependent on the leadership. Would that be okay that we
Yes,
start
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a bit big. What is a soulful, or at least for me anyway. So first of all, let's acknowledge that we are in a truly extraordinary time. And, when we called our book Leading in Chaos, which is a topic, a title we decided in, I think, June last year, we could have imagined, but at the same time, not really known the degree of chaos that is very rapidly unfolding. So the way I see things is, firstly, there is a chapter in the new book called The Traditions Speak, where I listed and quoted three of great traditions, and there are more, who foresaw this time and saw this as a junction point for humanity. So I place everything I say about leadership in that bigger context, because although it's a time of really devastating challenge, I think it's also a time, I'm sure it's a time of extraordinary possibility. And the possibility is to do with consciousness. So that's why in our new book, we argue very strongly that inner development has to be the first priority of every leader. And inner development means transforming their consciousness. And I hold that there are two pillars of that inner development work, and I call them healing and awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And by healing, I refer to, it's sometimes called trauma-informed leadership. It's where we recognize the obvious, that we have whole parts of our inner mind-body system frozen because we went through life and we inherited a lot of frozen energy, which is emotions that were never fully felt and couldn't be because it wasn't safe enough to feel them. And that's the healing part of the work. And I'd love to say more about what that really means. And the awakening part, and they absolutely go together, is where we awaken to what what you described as the deeper connection, where we liberate ourselves from the over-dominance of thinking, which actually exists in a very narrow bandwidth of reality. And we start to locate ourselves in a much, much bigger, much more multidimensional field and perceptual field. And so the combination of the two means that a leader is going to be sitting in a much, much deeper kind of presence. First of all, embodied, because we are so disembodied. We have normalized a culture of catastrophic disembodiment and disconnection. And normalize means we don't realize it until we do. So a leader who is on a path of inner development, as I teach it, will be in a much more embodied presence. They'll be in a much stronger heart field. We can need to talk more about what that means. Their intuition will be much more open. Their mind will be functioning at a far higher level of intelligence because it's now sitting in an ecosystem that is in flow rather than contracted. And they will also be sitting in with access to the kind of stillness we touched on in the meditation, not as something fleeting, but as something more and more constant. So I believe that we're being called now to this transformation of consciousness. And leaders who are on that journey, and I work with some of them, are creating organizations that are much more deeply alive, much more deeply interconnected, much more deeply and joyfully in service. And much more deeply attuned to the higher contribution of any organization. I mean, that would be just some of the initial things. But, my focus is all about what is the inner development in leaders that will generate soulful organizations. So please pick up on any part of what I said.
There is so much wisdom into what you've just shared, Nicholas. And I think, what came to me while you were saying that is, if I look at an architect, right? An architect creates those plans, makes something, comes up with something tangible. And what I heard from you right now is that the embodiment of the work, the inner work that a leader, a human being first is doing, and then, and then you talk about the person being a leader. And now if I extend that to being an architect of a soulful organization, how do you see the linkage, if there is any? How do you see them connected?
Well, I think there's totally a total connection because, first of all, I think one principle we need to really take on board, which at first might seem a little bit strange or too extreme, but actually it's not, is that what we call reality is 100% subjective. So the inner condition of the architect is the most important thing of all. The inner condition of the peacemaker, the inner condition of the consultant. Because everything in the world is frequency. And every person, every one of us, moment to moment, is transmitting a frequency. And that frequency is in varying degrees of fragmentation or coherence. So when I wrote Leader as Healer, it was all about coming into more coherence, because that determines everything. To give you a very simple example, we're in our city and we walk down a street that we know very well, and then we go into a gym or a yoga class, and we do an hour of deep body work, which changes us the way we feel radically. And we come out into that same street, but that same street is completely different now. It's the same, but something has changed here. That's what I mean by reality is 100% subjective. So very often leaders come to me and they want to deal with a situation out there because they think that needs fixing. And maybe eventually it does. But first of all, I will always say, okay, but we're going to look in here. And when you tell me about that situation, let's look at what's happening inside you. And if they're willing to do that, then we enter a whole territory inside them. And at some point, we will touch what I would call trauma. At some point, we'll touch how they're thinking and so on. But by the time we've finished working, they're going to have a completely different perception and understanding of that situation out there. But if we rush to architect out there without doing the inner work, out there is going to be as fragmented as our interior. That's why so many peace initiatives fail. Because they're coming, the sponsoring seed of the initiative is fragmentation. That's why I say, and it might sound like a joke, but it's not, that in many boardrooms, decisions are being taken by 5-year-olds. And I can give you many examples of those. But let's take that on board because that's what's happening. And in many senior leadership team meetings, we have a bunch of 5-year-olds around the table because they haven't done their inner development. They haven't processed all the emotional layers that are sitting in them, which cause them to be reactive, cause them to be triggered, and cause them to be in a kind of defensive, fear-based frequency. So in many ways, there's a whole chapter in the new book, which at one point I thought might be the title of the book, which is called To Be a Blessing, the highest calling of leadership. To be a blessing, because leaders, every one of us all the time is transmitting into the world. We know that. We know that. And our inner condition affects everything. It affects every interaction with whoever we meet. Is entirely dependent on my inner condition. So we can talk about being an architect, but we need to understand that everything about how I architect everything will depend on what is in here. Does that make sense?
Yes, beautiful, beautiful.
And it's also the part that we avoid all the time, because to really look at our trauma takes courage and it takes very skillful holding. And it's not the same as wellness. There's another chapter in the book about the difference between wellness and transformation. Wellness is a trillion-dollar business worldwide now. And it's not the same as transformation. It's great. It's great. I mean, it's very good. But wellness in the end is all about how do I feel better? Transformation is a recoding of my whole system. And that's what's needed now. And from that, we can begin to talk about architecting soulful organizations.
There's so much into this. You spoke about, we spoke about healing, we spoke about awakening. We also spoke about healing and trauma. And, you said that in boardrooms, meetings and decisions are made by 5-year-olds. And a lot of these times, as people start running their lives, we've put on layers on layers on layers. And the moment, and of course, we are reacting, as you said, we are living our lives, our belief system, everything is shaped from that conditioned self that we have. How do leaders realize, or even, like, what is the first step for leaders to realize that there is something that needs healing? Because this is a very esoteric word in today's world, saying healing. And I'm an executive, I don't need healing, and I'm not broken. Why do I need to heal? So where do leaders start?
Nice question. Well, I teach at the IMD Business School. Typically, I have around 40 global leaders for 2 or 3 days. And they might sit at the beginning with a little bit of that mindset. They will also implicitly or explicitly transmit to me, we don't do vulnerability. Why should we do vulnerability? That's the normalized mindset. But then we have to start very cognitively. Let's look, okay, for instance, here's a question that I think everyone can relate to. You know what flow feels like. Everyone knows what it's like to be in flow. Yeah? So it's energized, I feel connected, I have good ideas, all of that. Everyone knows that. And then I say, okay, so what percentage of the day do you live in flow on average? What do you imagine it is, Nidhi? In a room full of high-powered executives, what do you imagine is the average percentage they live in flow?
I think less than 5.
Between 5 and 10%. Yeah. I was worried for a moment you were going to say 30%. No, it's very low. So, hello, do you understand what you've normalized? Wouldn't it be nicer to live 70% of the day in flow? Why are we accepting that this is normal? It's not normal, it's totally dysfunctional. So 90% of the day, you're living in a far smaller possibility of who you are and how you perform. Ah, okay, so let's agree on that. Then I talk about doing and being. It's quite an important part of leader as healer. And I explain, and everyone understands, oh my goodness, I'm so over dominated by doing. And what's happened to my being? Okay, so the case is already quite strong. Then we take into account the degree of stress you're feeling, the degree of distress you're feeling, maybe the degree of despair and hopelessness you're feeling at the moment. So shall we look at a different possibility together? So we get an agreement. It's not very difficult. And it's funny, I find myself going back to the book because there is also a chapter in the book called Healing the Pandemic of Loneliness. So what I'm hearing and what the senior coaches I train are telling me is that more and more senior leaders are acknowledging how deeply lonely they feel. And that's really healthy. So what I mean is that the possibility of, when asked, how are you? The possibility of saying, I'm fine, is getting more difficult. It's getting more difficult because people are obviously not fine. And this is day by day increasing now, day by day as this crazy war goes on. How can anyone be fine? We need to face what's happening, and we need to see that the roots of what's happening are what has been built over decades now, which is this over-dominance of linear thinking, this disconnection from our bodies, this disconnection from our hearts, and ultimately totally ego-centered existence. It's all about me, or we, in whatever small we I'm part of. That's the crisis we're in. So we can look at it in the most small level or the most global level. So it's not very difficult. The simple answer to your question is it's actually not very difficult to engage this conversation. I've met very few people who will say, what you're talking about. Everything is fine. And, we have the most amazing introduction to the new book, forward rather, written by Michael Watkins, who's considered a global expert. And he says his forward is amazing, and I'd like to read you a little bit in a moment. But one thing he says is, if you really think everything is fine, just look around. Just look around. And also, by the way, Nidhi, as well, many, many, many leaders that I know are saying the ways we're used to working are not really working anymore. That's commonly spoken now because it's happening. So that's why I see this as a time of extraordinary possibility as well.
In your book, Leading with Chaos, you spoke about the spell of modern work. So we are always going into those infinite loops of pressure and delivery and urgency and speed. And you also spoke about loneliness. It's the silent killer. In one of the books, it said this is the silent killer of modern age.
Mm.
And do you see a link between the two?
Yes, I do. Yes, very much so. Because loneliness means disconnection. Ultimately, it's not really about the outside. It's a disconnection from myself. So the more I'm caught up in, exactly as you said, the frenetic pace, the constant doing, fixing, the more I call it exile. One of my programs is called Returning from Exile. The more in exile we are from ourselves, and then we feel deeply lonely. It's nothing actually to do with how many people are around or even how many friends I have. I can still feel the moment I make more intimate connection with myself at all levels, I don't feel lonely because I'm connected to life.
And what would be the different levels of intimacy with my own self?
So we could take that in a few ways. First of all, intimate with my body. You know, when we come into the world, we live in our body and we feel alive. And then because we have to start suppressing a lot of emotion, the way we do it is we do that. We lift out of our base, which is our pelvis, because it reduces the intensity of our experience, and we tense our body and we tense our breathing. And most people are breathing just up here. So, these silly reactions. Okay. So we already start to close down the whole experience of aliveness in our body. And you can see people crave that. You know, there's so many different ways of exercising now. People are craving because it feels so good when our body comes alive. But it needs more than a few exercise classes, although those are obviously very important, because we also, at a certain moment, we have to meet all the emotional material that's stored in our bodies. I give you a very simple example of this. I'm working with someone and they recognize that they're anxious. And by the way, that's 99% of people. And because they've understood my philosophy, let's call it, they understand we're not going to fix your anxiety. That's the worst thing we can do. I'm going to say, would it be okay to allow yourself just to feel it? No opposition, no analysis. I don't care even what you're anxious about. Would you allow yourself, do you feel safe enough just to say, okay, I'm going to feel it? And they say yes. Okay, let's do it together. And I'm, by the way, feeling with them because my body is open. And when our bodies are open, we feel each other. And they feel for a couple of minutes, and maybe it goes deeper and deeper, but they really give themselves to feeling their fear, their anxiety. So you know what happens after a few minutes? First of all, they start to feel really good and open. And then they start to say, wow, I feel my body alive. I feel my legs. I never felt my legs like this. Wow. You see how simple it is. That's why with the emotional work, what I teach is what sounds like it's a radically simple principle, which is, I call it radical inclusion. No emotion is positive or negative. Nothing needs fixing. Everything needs feeling. I was working just last week with a CEO, and this is a CEO who's really up for his inner development. And he was allowing himself to feel deep levels of unsafety and insecurity inside him, not as thoughts, but as real body feeling. And by the way, these are also in all of us. And we also, as we were doing that, we could also feel, wow, this is intergenerational. Your whole lineage has had this feeling. And he really let himself feel. And he arrived after half an hour or so in an extraordinary state of presence. And he understood, and here's a universal principle, that the degree of inner security and inner safety we can feel is entirely dependent on how much we can allow ourselves to feel the insecurity and unsafety that's locked in our nervous system. That's what, wow. It's like saying the degree of joy we can feel is entirely dependent on the degree of sadness and grief we can feel. Because it's all just life energy. He was also deeply immersed in the nowhere by the end, which is where the healing and awakening become totally interdependent. This is the work that's needed now. Not more psychologizing, not more analysis, not more. I know people who will tell you every detail of their traumatized childhood and nothing has changed because it's just cognitive knowledge. Everything has to be felt. And that's a radical journey. But when groups do that together, it's incredible. It's incredible. I see there's one person here who's just been part of a 6-month coaching training I've done. We just finished. And in that group, people became more and more safe enough to be truly vulnerable. And it was extraordinary what started the transformation that started to occur in them and therefore in their coaching. What space as coaches do we hold for people? What space do we hold for people? Because that affects everything. I know we're covering a lot of things here, so.
I think I need a moment to just stop. I mean, there
Why
is,
don't we, let's say do whatever is needed. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
let's take a moment, maybe quiet, yeah?
yeah, just let's do that for now.
Okay, I have a beautiful bell here. I'm going to ring the bell for a moment, yeah? Is that all right?
Yes, that would be lovely.
And
Thank
everyone, we can just take a moment quiet. I just need to, yeah, okay, here we go.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. You know
Yeah.
what really landed for me is that you can only truly feel joy when you are feeling the sorrow and the sadness, right?
When you allow that
Yes,
emotion, yes, yes,
to occur. And I
yeah.
think in our scriptures in Bhagavad Gita also, there is the same thing. I don't know the Sanskrit aspects of that.
Mm,
And
mm.
Amrita is knows back to back, but that's also where there is, as you said, there's no positive, there's no negative feeling. A feeling is a feeling, and it's there for a reason for us to feel it.
It's life happening. So any feeling we reject, we're rejecting life.
Right.
And therefore, we're going to be in tension inside. And therefore, our critical thinking will be less clear than it could be. Because anyway, we know we have our best ideas when we're in flow. That's why we say the idea came to me. All good ideas come to me. So I have to be available.
Right. And open to receive, because
Yes,
idea may come and go if I'm not
exactly.
open.
Exactly. And when teams, in my experience, when teams can learn to be more radically inclusive and more radically authentic, how are we feeling now? We're pretty scared right now. Okay, let's just feel that together. We're a bit lost, right? Yeah. Let's just feel that together instead of, okay, how are we going to fix this? Let's stay with the feeling. Floods of new ideas start to arise. But that takes, you see, that takes a leader who has done enough of their inner development to hold the space. And if someone says, I'm really scared, oh, thank you, I'm not going to, why should I try and fix you? I will only try and fix you because I'm uncomfortable. Rather than thank you, I thank you for being so real. Yeah, I meet you. I meet you.
The need for fixing somebody is mine, not theirs.
Exactly, 100%, 100%.
Right. So in all of this, Nicholas, where does love fit in?
Beautiful. So, so I would say there are two streams to the response to that. One is that as we do our own inner healing, because we all got very hurt in different ways. And therefore our hearts closed. So the more we do our inner healing, the more we feel the hurt we've been carrying for years. The more I work with a CEO whose father left when he was 14 and he didn't cry until 20 years later, he starts to cry with me and his heart starts to open. So he becomes more available then for love. That's one. And he becomes naturally more empathic, naturally more empathetic. Because when our heart's closed, we can't feel each other. We definitely can't care for each other. And then there's, in a way, a much deeper answer to your question, which I think is becoming more and more essential. And in my own journey over so many years, is that as we gradually drop more and more into what all the traditions have called the unified field, which is also, whose reality is also confirmed by the new sciences, we also begin to experience that at the core of the unified field is capital L, love. And that's one of the, if not the highest frequency of all. Some people might say it's pure light, but I would also say it's pure love with capital L, because that's not a love that comes and goes. It's not an emotion. All our emotions come and go, but capital L love doesn't come and go. We come and go from it. But the nature of the unified field is pure capital L love. And when we're walking through our day residing in that, we are a pure blessing. Which, by the way, doesn't mean we condone everything. It's two different things. It doesn't mean we don't sometimes take a sword. but we're doing it from a very different place inside. So love, to answer your question, is of the ultimate importance, as all the traditions have always said. Hence the great saying, the longest road you will ever walk is the road from your head to your heart. That's very deeply true.
So, and you spoke about love and leadership. I think it was in this book also. And in a corporate context, love can sound very unusual in itself,
Yeah.
right? So maybe we could explore a little bit about that. How does love look in a organizational context?
So, one of the things that happens in my leadership retreats is that, let's say somewhere on the second day, I get people writing in a very personal way. And then they come together in small groups and they share what they've written. And that's often when a lot of emotion comes out, because by then they feel safe enough together. And everyone is often quite blown away by those small group meetings, because they feel quite differently connected to each other after that. They also are hugely relieved, interestingly, to realize that everyone is carrying fears and tears. That's already the beginning of love. And I often, by the way, and then the whole, we've collectively crossed a big threshold together, because the whole field of the room is different. And I often just ask along the way, so because it would have been 6 people from different organizations. I often say, if you were in an intact team, having been through this process, do you think you'd be working better together? Of course we would. I mean, it's a universal yes, because there is a flow of connection, and that's the beginning of love.
Mm.
It's really simple. And we need to see how much we've dehumanized corporate life, how much we've numbed ourselves in corporate life. That is a topic as well. There's a beautiful chapter by Amy, and she just posted it on LinkedIn, because we're posting chapters every week, called On Numbing, where in her leadership retreat, she invites everyone at a certain point to list all the ways they numb themselves, which we all do. Phones, TV, whatever. No judgment, but let's just notice what we do to keep ourselves from feeling.
And I'm just thinking, if we, bring this, what you're sharing are such simple
Mm.
and such meaningful invitations of being. And I think if we operate, and I can say that for myself, is that once I see that in myself, what am I resisting? Whatever I'm resisting is going to persist.
Absolute life truth. Whatever we resist persists. Thank you, Nita. Yes, exactly.
And we have this culture of numbing. So if
Yeah.
we have this numbness go away from our leadership and organizations, what kind of culture do you think this world can have?
I think we can have cultures that are founded on aliveness and joy and love, and which will be working, first of all, will be performing in much higher levels, and will also be naturally aware of the bigger ecosystems and how we are contributing to them, whatever we're doing.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
Beautiful.
A workplace where people look forward to coming to work because it's a place of aliveness and creativity. And of course, it's going to be, we're facing many, many challenges, but we do so with this feeling of togetherness. We're not alone. And I think that's also becoming more and more evident in every dimension of life, from the organizational to the spiritual, that it's not we need community, we need to be together. We need to support each other to do the kind of development. We can't do the healing work alone. That's actually impossible. There is no way I can look at parts of my unconscious alone. I mean, they just won't surface because we've all spent years regulating them. And they will only surface when I'm in the presence of someone who creates a field of love that makes it safe enough for my unconscious to show itself. That's the meaning of unconscious. We don't even know it's there.
What I'm getting from what I'm hearing from you is that we need lots more, many more healers and lovers in this world.
Yes, yes, yeah, yes. And we need, I'm often talking about the two archetypes actually, which are the healer and the warrior. But we need warriors who are rooted in love. Mm. Maybe it's time to take some questions.
Yeah. Just before we go, just one last question that I have. What are some of the practices that you've cultivated, to get this kind of awareness, this kind of wisdom, and you've shared so much with us today? What were some of your practices?
Personally,
Yes.
I mean, okay. So I don't do, there've been periods where I've done daily meditation, even for an hour or so. I aim to now more to be in as constant a kind of meditation frequency as possible, which I don't always manage. But I also keep attending to my own trauma layers when they arise. And how do I know when they arise? Because I get triggered.
Mm.
So what do I do? I mean, I also do a lot of physical work. I'm very physical. I'm fortunate here. I live in beautiful nature. So I walk a lot. I ride a lot on my bike. I often do qigong. And I'm also very musical. So music is very important to me. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And there are a lot of activity happening on the chat box. We'll just quickly look at it.
I've shared the questions, Didi, with you in a private message.
Oh, okay.
Be nice to have someone also come on live if they wish.
Yes, so Veer, would you like to unmute yourself and ask? He's asked a question in the chat box.
Sure. I think my camera is working. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know if you can see me, but
Yes, we can now. Go ahead.
Nicholas, thank you so much for that, for everything you've shared. I feel quite energized and refreshed in this hour that we spent with you. I couldn't agree with you more about some of the things you said about the numbness, about boardroom sometimes being a bunch of 5-year-olds around the table, and the trauma that needs to be addressed. And also what you said about vulnerability being so difficult for
Mm,
someone to embrace, particularly leaders.
mm.
And I often wonder, how does one get a leader to embrace their vulnerability or to even accept that they need to do that work? I guess that's the starting point of all the transformation that can happen within an individual. So
Mhm.
I'm just curious to understand from your experience, how do you get uh, a leader to take the plunge for the first time?
Well, first of all, I mean, they have to have a certain wanting to do that. So they have to, first of all, recognize that something is either not going as well as it could, or that something in them just knows that there is something more that's needed. Now, if I'm teaching a whole group, then it will be, as I said to Nidhi, making a case for this, and that's not so difficult to do. But there are also more and more leaders who just know that something much more is possible, and that their life is, I was with a group in the city a couple of weeks ago, actually, who have a remarkable level of authenticity in a very ultra conventional organization. And even during my work with them, one of the head of the COO was like, "Oh God, I'm thinking about how I'm parenting. Oh, it's so painful to see how I treat my daughter." Okay, beautiful. This is very in our lives. There are very few people who will say, "Oh, everything in my life is fine." Okay, then we don't need to talk. So enjoy your life. I'm not here to persuade you. If the door is a little bit open, I can invite you in.
Mm.
If the door is closed, and for a fair number of people, the door is closed, okay. It's not my job to persuade you. But many more doors are opening, Via. That's for
Yeah.
sure. And one of the reasons for that is exactly people realizing that our previous modalities of working have reached a limit and they're actually not working. I mean, literally, people are saying a lot of the ways we used to fix things, they're just not working anymore. They can't because everything is moving too much. And linear thinking, there's no way that linear thinking alone can navigate the complexity and chaos. So getting people to understand that is not so difficult if they're at least a little bit willing. And then undertaking the work is a mixture. Part of it is actually very joyful, and part of it does mean we need to be willing to look into the dark inside. It's like as I say, we need to go down into the cellar with our torch and have a look at what's in the corners of the cellar. And at first that's like, oh, but once we do it a few times, it's okay, because once we actually do feel things that our mind beforehand might say, oh, no, 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 it's very liberating.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Via.
Thank you, Veer. Ray, would you like to come in and ask your question?
Um, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Ray.
Ah, that's incredible because I never actually put my hand up to ask a question, but then I did want to ask one. So the
Brilliant.
technology is working for us. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Incredible work that you're doing and speaks to me greatly, my own
Mm,
personal experiences.
mm,
Um, but I wondered, because I'm trying to focus my work now more on, and this is a lot about soulful organizations.
mm.
We have this idea because I used to work a lot in the agile world and the world of transformation, for 10, 15 years.
Yeah,
And while some would think it was about better linear thinking and better transparency, and we're going to do twice as much in half the time. As a coach, it
yes.
wasn't about that. It was more about the things that you're talking about, changing the field, better ideas, all of that.
Mm.
But what my question is really around the thing that I faced with that, which is I could often get C-suite people, higher executives. I could often get them, you know, into a different field, into talking a different way, into realizing there were new ways of being.
Mm.
Now, the question is, it never really transmitted to people right across the organization because all of those managers who we wanted to be leaders in the human sense that you're talking, they never had the time. They were always under pressure. They were always
Mm.
on the back foot. They were always watching the numbers and the linear thinking. And as much
Mm.
as I am so bought into what you've got to say, I still don't think they do. And I don't think
Mm.
they will. So how do we tackle that? It's not just
And
a game of boardroom people in sneakers.
mm. And what's your sense of why that didn't happen? Or yeah, what's your real sense of why?
Um, I think it was quite simple, and some people um, would even discuss this openly.
Mm.
Um, and HR in most organizations understand this as well, because what they were asking of people in those people used to describe as the frozen middle of organizations, what they were
Mm.
asking of those people was already beyond their capacity.
Uh-huh.
What they were asking of middle managers, so to speak, in organizations was already beyond their capacity. And now what we find 10 years later in the chaos and collapse that you so well speak to is these people have even more work to do, have even
Mm.
more information put in front of them.
Yeah,
We
I've
have
seen that too.
such huge levels of burnout, but it's not
Yeah,
CEOs,
yeah.
people in the middle of organizations who can no
Right,
longer cope.
right.
So that's
Yeah,
where my question is.
yeah. No, I think you're hitting such an important point. And I see that too. I see that too. So we're really talking about a whole culture transformation.
Yeah, very
And
much so.
that's a very, very big question for us all. Um, I mean, I was a while back, I did a program with the top team of a big bank in Asia. And one of their presenting issues was we've done so many change initiatives and why aren't they working? And we worked, and then at lunch with one of the heads of the team, light bulbs started to go on. It was very powerful. And in essence, what he started to realize, and he was both inspired and shocked and a little bit frightened by what he was realizing, was that all these change initiatives were addressed at the doing analytical part of people, and that none of them took into account the human beings in the organization. And it was literally almost a life-changing moment for him. And then the team, as we went on through the day, also like the pennies started to drop. Now, I'm not saying that changed everything because we're still in dialogue, because they also realized that the only way that would start to change would be if they committed to a transformation process in themselves. So that doesn't answer your question, Ray. It just lays the territory open more.
Well,
I also, the last time I was at the IMD, at the end of the 3 days, a Japanese executive went up to the head of the program in tears, which is already something, and said to him, I realize I'm treating all my people like robots. So all I can say, I'm not giving you a comprehensive answer because it's a big thing you're asking, and I love that your passion for this. All I'm saying is that all that can happen is chipping away at this.
Well, one thing I would say, just as a final thing, and I don't want to take
Please.
up any more, is what I learned from a lot of my colleagues and what I still am passionate about
Mm,
is that if you look at the way HR works across the world, and many of us in this room will have worked with HR,
mm.
just our idea of performance is 99% locked into
I
individuals.
know. Yeah.
And HR spend their time doing this. If HR could make one change and say,
Yes.
actually, we're going to look at performance as teams and systems,
Amazing.
then people
Amazing.
would be focusing on systems and interactions. Just that
Yes.
one change.
I agree. I agree. And more power to you in what you're doing.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Ray. So we've got a question from Shubhra, Mosmi and Shankar. So I'll invite Shubhra first.
Yeah, thanks, Nidhi. Nicholas, thank you for this really beautiful, profound talk, chat. My question was, it was coming from one of the things you said, which was that, transformation or healing can happen in the presence of love and in the
Mm,
presence of joy,
mm,
aliveness.
mm.
And yet, a lot of times people don't have the luxury or the privilege of being in a space of love. They're in
Right.
the presence of a lot of negativity. It could be offices, it could be families, it could be different situations. In that case, then how do we begin the process of healing? Uh, while I understand they can go in for a program, such as yours, the ones that where you do inner work for teams or for people, but they do come back to those very environments where there is presence of the very triggers that uh, keep them away from that healing. So in that sense, what are some of the answers?
So I think one answer is that in many different ways, groups or pods of people need to keep coming together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, for instance, one of my top team of coaches was telling me the other day, actually, he sent me pictures. He lives in Ireland in quite a small village, but whole groups in the village have been coming together to do reconstruction work. People from all walks of life. And the way he said it is there's a whole field of love here. Now, no one there is talking about spiritual awakening or trauma healing, but something is happening there. So I think that's why I say there need to be more and more, and there are more and more pods like that, because people need that. We need that. We need connection deep down. And in organizational life, it's essential that people who've been on any kind of program, that there's a sustained ecosystem of support and development. Because you're right, we can have a great opening and then we go back. It's the same in you go on a spiritual retreat and you touch something amazing and then you go back to your life. And over the weeks, the old, the environment and your old patterns start to come back. So there has to be ongoing sustained development for all of us in one way or another. And we have to seek the groups and the associations where we can do that. We have to find the friends and colleagues who are committed to development. And we have to be part of projects like reconstruction in a small village.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do hold very strongly that deep down that's what we crave, that's what we want. We want to come home. And coming home is finding connection with each other, being in a flow of love, even if we wouldn't call it that, because that feels just deeply good. And also we see in programs, Amy writes about this very well, that by the end of 4 or 5 days, the level of mutual support is extraordinary. And then people don't have to be taught how to do that. It just flows out of us as some of the dross falls away, some of the numbing falls away. It's so natural for us to care for each other.
Yeah. I am really touched by the line that you said, that the longest journey is from our head to the heart. So
I think it's a Sufi saying, I think.
beautiful. It's really, thank you.
Yeah. And
Thank
it's so simple, and yet, my goodness, the longest road. But that's the other thing that's happening now that I see a lot. Everything is moving faster. At the same time as the chaos is moving so fast, literally almost day by day. I mean, I noticed recently I'm opening my news app in the morning thinking, what's happened in the last 24 hours? At the same time as everything is moving faster and faster into chaos, and what Joanna Macy called the great unraveling, so developmental edges are going much faster as well. Initiations are happening faster for people. That's part of why this is such an extraordinary time. I see it in myself as well. Literally, week by week, sometimes whole dimensions are opening.
Exciting.
And we're all called. Everyone here is called, and that's very powerful. Maybe we can just absorb that for a moment, that everyone in this call, some part of the soul field here is already a soul field that's composed of this calling to contribute. That's powerful. That's very powerful. This calling to connect, calling to come home, calling to be agents of correction. This is the time in the world for huge correction. Sometimes just being in a field like this is already very supportive for us. Thank you, Shubhra.
Thank you,
Yes, ma'am.
Shubhra. We've got Moshmi and Shankar. If you can ask your questions, and then I'll ask Mark to just wrap up the session.
Hi, thank you. Such a beautiful and wonderful place to be in. If I can look at love as that one huge pillar, like a magnetic concentric circles going out, and it would be so, if only the world were like that. So
Well, it's up to us. It's up to
yes,
us to be
absolutely.
transmitters of that.
Yeah, but sometimes I feel we're very small magnets. I hope we could all come together and become a bigger magnet and pull that through. It would have been so great.
But let me just say, sorry, I know I'm interrupting you, but there's also something very important to understand here, because it's always been taught, and I'm pretty sure it's really true, that it doesn't take huge numbers to create change. Because the world is a world of frequency, that small numbers of people in high frequency of love are having much more impact than we might realize. That's a very important principle. That it's more than a principle, it's a part of the metaphysics of reality.
So that's what I wanted to ask you today. So when I started my life in the corporate world 3 decades back, it was a world of possibilities. There was culture,
Mm,
there was celebration. You were
mm.
just beginning, and everything seemed possible. And as you climbed higher and higher up the ladder and moved from one better company to the next better company and the next better one, then to the leader, and you climbed up what you saw, what happened is actually a narrowing of perspective, and linear thinking became the kind of crutches, so to say, to hold
Yes.
together an organization. That's the only way you know. So
Right.
anyone who questions, during good times, it's all right. You question, something good comes. But in the last 3 4 years, what I have seen, and that leaders are in fear of losing their job, their available whatever money they need to make and have a cushy life. And juniors do not want to ask the question, because then you do not know whether you'll have a job tomorrow. So there's insecurity, and in there's fear. So culture,
Right.
forget about culture of love or anything else, culture disappears. And I wanted to bring this entire pillar of, everybody is like an island, I can see, and there is this pillar of love which is big and beckoning, but it's almost like the radio sets are turned off. No one wants to switch them on, because if you switch them on, the frequency will be beautiful, it will be one of love. You may try. So I just want to know, how do you really set about doing that? I tried it in my last organization, being a beacon of love, and but there were not enough voices, too many voices of fear, not enough courage.
So my answer to your how question is keep working on yourself. And also, no, I want to read you a very important quote. This is very important for all of us. Just one moment, I'll find it quite quickly. Okay, I don't find it, but it's by Václav Havel,
Okay.
the former Prime Minister of Czech Republic.
Czech Republic.
And he said, hope, I'm paraphrasing now, hope is not about the outcome. Hope is doing something that makes deep sense to you, whatever the outcome. So we need to be less focused on the outcome and more focused on what we're bringing.
Okay. This also very much what the Bhagavad Gita also says. You do your deed, whatever you're called to do, and don't think about the outcome. Fair enough.
Right, right, right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Marsmi. And we'll take one last question from Shankar, and then I'll hand it over to Mark.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. Yeah, I'm aware we only have 4 minutes to go, but I just want to acknowledge Nicholas. I'm just sitting with the highest call for leadership is to be a blessing. I'm just still sitting with that. So thank you for offering it. I don't have a question as such, Nicholas, but I have I'm kind of what is unfolding for me in terms of inquiry is what you already touched upon, the integration of coherence, top team, and sustainable performance. And what is unfolding for me as I sit in this constellation is I really heard you when you spoke about small numbers of people having great impact and how top teams they could carve out those small groups of people building team coherence. And yet, in my humble experience, what I've noticed is that while that small constellation creates that field of love, when we go back to real life, and as I said, reality is 100% subjective. The love, in terms of translating love into aligned contribution, is a journey of its own. So, no question, but I'm just very curious to see kind of. I just want to kind of bridge, integrate what can happen in, let's say, in a safe space like this. We unfold, we create safe spaces, and then what happens when we go back to real world. So really curious about that integration bit. How can that love as a field keep kind of no kind of keep percolating itself as we go along? Yeah.
Thank you, Shankar. Beautiful inquiry. Yeah. Nidhi, can I read just one short thing?
Yes, please do, Nicholas.
This is from the foreword to this book written by Michael Watkins. And he says this: in leading in chaos, Ancient wisdom traditions speak to quarterly earnings. Trauma healing becomes organizational strategy. The body's intelligence supersedes the mind's calculations. Prayer and spreadsheets coexist. This isn't New Age wishful thinking, but a rigorous argument that unless we reunite body and mind, heart and strategy, sacred and secular, we will continue to create the conditions that threaten our species' survival.
Wow. That is big, and that sounds, it is so fundamental, and I think it's inevitable if we want to see humanity, leadership, human beings survive and thrive. That's what we need. So
That's the threshold. That's the junction point that we're in, I think.
Thank you, Nicholas. Mark, I would invite you in to close the session.
Yes, thank you so much. What a beautiful session this has been. So big thank you to Nicholas for sharing your wisdom, your presence, your depth. Big thank you to Nidhi for holding the space, for flowing with the conversation, for being so present to everything that was being said, and the energy also in the conversation and following that so beautifully. Nothing needs fixing, everything needs feeling. Really sticks to me. And, for me, you took us into a field of feeling. That's how I experienced this. There was, each word carried depth and resonated like the bell. So I felt the vibration of the words, and it touched me. And I think that journey from the head to the heart was very immediate, actually. Immediate. So it might be the longest journey, but it can also be the fastest journey.
It's very true.
And the most immediate one. So thank you for taking us there, taking us into this place of feeling and the richness that brings. And thank you everyone for joining, and co-creating this space. I think that is also a wonderful takeaway, that we're all on this journey, we're all sensing into the possibilities, we're all paying attention to the importance of the inner work and keep building that coherence. Because it does impact, and it doesn't need the masses. It needs a small group that is holding that high frequency, high vibration to reach a tipping point. Thank you, everyone, and of course a big thank you to Amrita for being this amazing host and inviting such special guests into this resource session. It's such a pleasure to be traveling together with all of you. So until the next time.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much, Amrita.
So
thank you, Nidhi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicholas. Thank you.
And to everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Stop the recording.